My girlfriend's secret life was exposed at our wedding. The day was perfect. The sun cast a golden glow over the outdoor venue. The scent of fresh roses filled the air, and soft violin music played as guests took their seats. I stood at the altar, palms slightly sweaty but heartful, waiting for my bride, Sophie. She was the love of my life, the woman who had turned my dull world into something magical. Her kindness, her laughter, the way she always knew how to make me smile. I couldn't wait to spend forever with her. The music changed. The guests turned, and there she was. Sophie looked breathtaking in her white dress, her dark curls cascading over her shoulders, her bright eyes locked on mine. I swallowed hard, my chest tightening with emotions I could barely contain. This was it. She reached me, her hands warm in mine. The officiant smiled and began speaking. Everything felt dreamlike, until the chaos began. A voice rang out. "Stop the wedding!" Gasps rippled through the crowd. My stomach dropped. Sophie's grip on my hands tensed. A man stepped forward, dressed in a sharp black suit, holding up his phone. His face was unreadable, but his eyes burned with intensity. "You all deserve to know the truth about Sophie." Whispers erupted. My mind scrambled. What truth? I glanced at Sophie, expecting confusion, fear, anything. But what I saw instead made my blood run cold. She wasn't shocked. She was prepared, like she had been expecting this. The man turned his phone toward the crowd. A video began playing. The second I saw the screen, my heart stopped. Sophie, my sweet, loving Sophie, was in the footage. But she wasn't the woman I knew. She was someone else entirely. The video played on the large screen the man had set up, and the entire wedding fell into a stunned silence. I saw Sophie. My Sophie. But she wasn't the woman I thought I knew. She was dressed in all black, her face obscured by shadows in what looked like a dimly lit club. She leaned over to a man in a suit, whispering something in his ear. Then, just as quickly, she slipped a thick envelope into his hands and disappeared into the crowd. My pulse pounded in my ears. The guests murmured in confusion and shock, eyes darting between me, Sophie, and the man who had interrupted the wedding. "What the hell is this?" I finally managed to say, my voice hoarse. Sophie let out a slow breath and turned to face me. There was no panic in her expression, no guilt, just resignation. "It's complicated," she said. The man scoffed. "Complicated?" "You're a liar, Sophie. A con artist. A thief." My stomach twisted. A thief? People in the crowd started shifting uncomfortably, whispering among themselves. My best man, Jake, took a cautious step closer to me as if bracing for impact. "I didn't steal anything," Sophie said, her voice eerily calm. "Then why don't we tell everyone who you really are?" The man tapped his phone and another clip played. This time, Sophie was sitting across from someone in a cafe, her face fully visible. "I told you," she said in the video, her voice hushed but clear. "Once the money is transferred, I disappear. No one will ever find out what happened." The air in my lungs vanished. I turned to Sophie, my hands trembling. "What is this?" She finally looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time I saw something different in her eyes. Not just love, not just fear, but something deeper, something I couldn't read. "Ethan," she said softly, "I was going to tell you, but not like this." "Tell me what?" Before I could demand an answer, the man spoke again. "Your fiancée is a professional scammer, Ethan. She cons people out of money, disappears, and changes identities. I should know." His jaw clenched. "She stole from my family." A sharp gasp came from the guests. I took a step back, my head spinning. This wasn't real. This had to be some horrible mistake. But Sophie didn't deny it. She just stood there, her hands clenched, waiting for me to decide. The wedding was over. But my nightmare had just begun. The world around me blurred. The guests' whispers turned into a dull roar, but all I could focus on was Sophie, or whatever her real name was. Standing before me, her hands clenched at her sides, her face unreadable. The man who had interrupted, who claimed Sophie had stolen from his family, took another step forward. She scammed my father out of $200,000. He thought he was investing in a business deal, but the moment the money transferred, she vanished. His voice was laced with fury. And now you're about to marry her? I felt sick. Sophie, I croaked. Tell me this isn't true. She looked at me then, her expression softer than I expected. Ethan, I love you. That was real. That was real? My head pounded. You're not answering the question, I said through gritted teeth. She exhaled and glanced around at the crowd. Our friends, our families, the people who had come to celebrate what was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives. But now, all they saw was a spectacle. Then, finally, she spoke. It's true. Gasps filled the air. My mom covered her mouth in shock. Jake muttered a curse under his breath. I wasn't always Sophie, she admitted. I've had different names, different lives. I did things I'm not proud of, Ethan, but I left that world behind. I never scammed you. I never lied about my feelings for you. She stepped closer, her eyes pleading. I was going to tell you after the wedding. I was afraid you'd leave me. Afraid I'd leave? She had lied about everything, and she still thought we could just move past this? The man, her supposed victim, shook his head in disgust. She's a fraud, Ethan. You can't believe anything she says. I wanted to deny it, to find some way to rationalize this. But the evidence was there. The videos. Her own admission. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. What do I do? Do I walk away? Do I demand the truth? Do I even know who I fell in love with? The wedding was ruined. My heart felt shattered. And Sophie, if that was even her real name, was just standing there, waiting for my decision. My hands trembled. My heart pounded so hard it drowned out the whispers of the guests. I had dreamed of this day for months. Imagine Sophie and I standing here, exchanging vows, starting our forever. But now? Now I didn't even know who she was. Sophie. My voice cracked as I tried to steady myself. Or whatever your real name is. She flinched at that, but I didn't care. You've been lying to me this whole time. You were just going to marry me and pretend none of this ever happened? She shook her head. No, Ethan, I was going to tell you. I swear, when? I demanded. After we signed the marriage certificate? After you drained my bank account? Tears welled up in her eyes. I wasn't going to do that to you. How am I supposed to believe anything you say? My voice was sharper than I intended, but I was too broken to hold back. The man who had exposed her scoffed. You can't. He turned to the crowd. Call the cops. She needs to answer for what she's done. Panic flashed across Sophie's face. She grabbed my hands. Ethan, listen to me. I love you. That part was never a lie. I pulled my hands away. And the rest of it? She didn't answer. Sirens blared in the distance. Someone had already called the police. I took a step back, my mind screaming at me to run, to get as far away from this disaster as possible. Sophie, or whoever she was, looked around as if searching for an escape. But there was none. The sirens grew louder. She turned back to me one last time. I'm sorry. Then, before I could react, she bolted. She ran straight through the crowd, shoving chairs aside, sprinting toward the parking lot. People gasped. Some tried to stop her, but she was fast. Too fast. And in that moment, as I watched my almost wife flee from our own wedding, I realized something terrifying. I had no idea who she really was. Sophie, stop! I shouted. But she was already gone, disappearing past the rows of shocked guests, kicking up flower petals as she sprinted toward the parking lot. The police cars screeched into the venue, red and blue lights flashing across the horrified faces of my friends and family. 2 officers jumped out, scanning the crowd. "She's running!" someone yelled. One of the cops spotted her just as she reached the edge of the lot. "Freeze!" he shouted. But Sophie, or whatever her real name was, didn't stop. She didn't even hesitate. She dodged around the guests and leaped over a low hedge, her wedding dress tearing as she disappeared into the trees beyond the venue. One of the officers took off after her, while the other turned to me. "You're the groom?" I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Yeah." "Do you know where she might go?" His voice was urgent, but I could barely think. Did I know where she would go? Did I know anything about her at all? I shook my head slowly. I don't know. The officer exchanged a glance with his partner, who was already speaking into his radio. "We'll need to ask you some questions." I felt the stares of my guests burning into me. My mom looked like she was about to pass out. My best man, Jake, stood stiffly beside me, his jaw clenched. I was supposed to be married right now. Instead, I was standing here, in front of a ruined wedding, being questioned by the police about the woman I had planned to spend my life with. A woman who had just run for her life rather than face the truth. "She planned this," I muttered, the realization hitting me like a freight train. The officer frowned. "What do you mean?" "She knew this might happen." My mind raced through every memory of Sophie. Her little quirks, the way she always avoided talking about her past, the way she insisted on handling the wedding finances herself. She always had an escape plan, and she had just used it. I clenched my fists. I had loved her. I had trusted her. And now she was gone. But something told me this wasn't over. Not even close. The police swarmed the venue, but I barely heard their voices. Everything around me felt distant, like I was watching my own life unravel from behind a glass wall. Sophie, or whoever she really was, had vanished into the woods beyond the parking lot, and part of me knew they wouldn't catch her. She was too smart, too fast. This wasn't her first time running. "Ethan." I turned to see my best man, Jake, standing beside me. His face was tight with anger and concern. "Are you okay?" Was I okay? I looked around at the wedding that had turned into a crime scene. Guests whispering, police officers taking statements, my mom sitting with her head in her hands. The expensive flowers, the decorations, the perfect setup. All of it meant nothing now. "No," I admitted. "I don't think I am." The officer in front of me cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter, we're going to need you to answer a few questions." I nodded numbly. "Yeah, of course." They took me to a quiet area near the entrance of the venue, away from the murmuring guests. The lead officer, a guy named Detective Harris, pulled out a notepad. "How long have you known Sophie?" he asked. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "About 2 years." "And you never suspected anything unusual about her past?" "No." I exhaled shakily. I mean, she was always private. She didn't talk much about her family, but I thought she just had a rough past. I didn't push her. Jake crossed his arms, his jaw clenching. "Maybe you should have." I ignored him. "Did she ever ask you for money?" Harris continued. "No," I said, shaking my head. "Nothing like that. She handled a lot of the wedding expenses, actually." My stomach twisted at the thought. Where did that money even come from? Harris scribbled something down. "And before today, you had no idea she was involved in fraud?" I let out a bitter laugh. "I was about to marry her." The detective nodded. "We'll need access to anything you have on her. Messages, emails, anything that might help us track her down." I hesitated. Part of me still didn't want to believe this was real. That Sophie had actually used me. Lied to me. That our love had been built on nothing but secrets. But another part of me, The part that saw her run rather than face the truth, knew I had no choice. "I'll give you everything I have," I said quietly. An hour later, the police were still searching the area, but there was no sign of Sophie. The guests had started leaving, shaking their heads and murmuring about how they'd never seen anything like this before. I stood near the altar, staring at the torn aisle runner, at the scattered flower petals where Sophie had once stood, where she had promised me she loved me. Jake came up beside me, hands in his pockets. "I'm sorry, man," I exhaled. "Yeah." After a long pause, he said, "What are you going to do now?" I didn't know, but I did know one thing. I needed answers. Because Sophie may have run today, but she couldn't run forever. The wedding was over. The guests had left. The police were gone. And Sophie, if that was even her real name, had disappeared like a ghost. I sat alone at the reception table, staring at the untouched wedding cake, the empty champagne glasses, the decorations that now felt like props in a cruel joke. My hands curled into fists. 2 years? 2 years of love, of trust, of believing I had found the woman I was going to spend my life with. And in one afternoon, it had all crumbled. Jake sat down across from me, setting a glass of whiskey in front of me. "Drink." I didn't argue. I took the glass and downed half of it, the burn barely registering. "She's gone, man," Jake said, leaning back in his chair. "Cops will handle it. You need to move on." I let out a humorless laugh. "Move on? How? I don't even know what was real anymore." Jake sighed, rubbing his jaw. "Look, I get it. You loved her, but she played you." I clenched my jaw. "I don't think it was all a lie." Jake scoffed. "You serious?" "She ran, Ethan. The moment she got exposed, she didn't try to explain. She ran." I wanted to argue, to say that she had tried, briefly, to explain, that she had looked at me like she really, truly loved me. But what did that mean now? I set the glass down. "I need to find her." Jake's eyes widened. "Find her? Bro, what the hell are you talking about?" I met his gaze. "She's out there somewhere, and I need to know the truth. All of it." Jake shook his head. "Dude, the cops are looking for her. You don't need to do anything." I stood up, my mind suddenly sharp. The cops are doing what they always do, following a trail that she's probably already covered. But I knew her. I knew her habits, the little things she did when she was nervous, when she was hiding something. Jake ran a hand through his hair. "Ethan, this is insane." "Maybe." I grabbed my jacket. "But I need answers." He exhaled heavily. "Where are you even going to start?" I thought about it. Sophie had always been careful, always secretive about certain things. But there were moments, small ones, where she had slipped. She had a storage unit. I had seen the key once, tucked into her jewelry box. When I'd asked about it, she had brushed it off. I never questioned it. But now? Now I had questions, and I was going to find the answers, even if I didn't like what I found.